So Tom Cross, it's not surprising that you would reunite with Damien Chazelle for First Man. After all, you have edited his last two movies, winning an Oscar for Whiplash. Talk a little bit about some of the new challenges that you faced in First Man. I mean, how did this compare to your other previous collaborations?
Well, this one was definitely, I think, with all projects with Damien, there's always some new ground covered. He likes to try different things. This project was definitely different than Whiplash and La La Land. I mean, Whiplash, he wanted to tell the story through the editing. He wanted the cuts to be fast. He wanted to, he wanted the audience to feel the cuts. He wanted to have cuts at right angles. La La Land, he wanted it to be slow and more languid, more romantic. And with this movie, he really wanted it to feel very visceral. He wanted it to be immersive. And again, he wanted to do that through the editing style. He wanted the audience, he feels the cuts in a certain way. And so, but different than La La Land and different from Whiplash. I mean, this project, he was inspired to give it a cinema verite documentary feel for much of the story, and that meant that when I put it together, that I was invariably looking for different things when I was going through the dailies. So I put First Man together in a way where I featured certain camera imperfections, certain moves and rack focus moments, things that I wouldn't normally have, that I wouldn't use, I found to be very usable with First Man. So it was a very different process in putting it together because he shot it differently.
Right. You mentioned, the immersive kind of experience that you wanted to create. Could you just dive a bit more into like why that was important for this particular movie?
Well, I think when Damien was approaching this project with screenwriter Josh Singer, they were really inspired by the iconography of NASA. They were really interested in getting to the heart of Neil Armstrong, the person, the human being. And they watched hours and hours of NASA archival footage. And what they saw was there was a lot of archival footage inside the space capsules. And often this footage was shot by the astronauts themselves. So the footage was inside the capsule, so it was very claustrophobic. But because it was shot by the astronauts themselves, it almost felt like you were watching astronaut home movies, by Neil Armstrong and by the other astronauts. And in that way, Damien found the footage very personal and very intimate. And that's something that he didn't expect. And that's something he wanted to bring to First Man, because I think when you think about Apollo 11 and you think about Neil Armstrong landing on the moon, we know the outcome. We know they did it. We know they got back alive. We're familiar with Neil Armstrong, the icon. What Damien really wanted to do was get underneath that and show more unseen aspects, more personal aspects. And so he felt that if we could put the audience in that spacesuit, in the shoes of these astronauts, that they would feel more engaged. And if the audience feels like they're climbing into the space capsule, the hope is that they'll realize just how dangerous these missions really were. They were going up in these space capsules that really look more like something out of the machine age than the space age. And so that's why we lingered on the gauges and the switches and the rivets and the bolts holding these crafts together, because you really see that they felt, more like being in a submarine rather than a futuristic spacecraft. And that was really important to Damien. And for that stuff, he was really inspired to get inside the action. He was really inspired by movies like Saving Private Ryan and United 93. He really wanted the audience to feel immersed. And that's what brought us to, taking it up one step further and going the IMAX route for the lunar sequence for when they land on the moon. That was just another way that Damien felt like he might be able to present this world in a different way than it had been seen before. He wanted to make it very experiential.
Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit more about working with IMAX and that. Was that a new technology for you to work with?
For me, definitely. I guess for all of us, it was new. I don't think Linus had worked with it before. Linus Sandgren, the cinematographer. Um, it was amazing. It was a lot of fun. I mean, you know, I think Damien always planned on the moon feeling different. He really wanted to to have that moment where the camera goes out of the hatch outside of the capsule and goes outside. He wanted that to be a real show-stopping moment. So if you see the movie in IMAX, the entire film is framed in 240 and widescreen CinemaScope. But when we go out of the hatch on the moon, if you're seeing it in a true IMAX theater, the screen opens up to 143. The height and the bottom open up so that it's a full height IMAX frame. And, you know, Damien kind of envisioned that as kind of a Wizard of Oz type of moment where Dorothy crosses the threshold from black and white sepia into Technicolor. And what I found working with the IMAX footage was that it was so shocking in its resolution. I mean, the definition was so deep that it kind of invited us to cut at a different pace once we got onto the moon. So that's why once we go through the hatch, we kind of slowed things down and things become a little more dreamlike, a little slower. And you can do that with IMAX because there's so much detail. You can really linger on the little the fine grain of the soil. And I mean, the other great thing about that was that it allowed us to double down on this sort of subjective experiential style that we were going for. So we could really linger on the hands climbing down the rungs of the ladder, and we could stay on the shot of the foot taking the first step and stuff like that. So, you know, it definitely helped us accomplish presenting the moon as a completely different world, a different place than we had experienced before. But as an editor, it was really fun because it meant that I got to switch up tone and, you know, editing styles, because what had come before was very cutty, generally very choppy. Almost, I mean, it was a combination of 16 and 35 millimeter photography before, so it was very gritty. Whereas when we get to the moon, it's a completely different. It looks different pictorially, and that meant that I had to cut it differently. So as an editor, that's kind of fun to get to play around with that stuff.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you know, you really do feel the difference between, you know, the first scene of the movie where, you know,
Right.
he's up in that capsule and it's all shaking around and you feel the danger of it. And then when he gets to the serenity of the moon, you know, you really do feel that difference there.
I mean,
Um,
and what was fun too about that was once you open up onto the moon and you have this IMAX resolution, it was fun to get to the moment. And I don't want to spoil too many things, but to get to the moment where we have some flashbacks and we're cutting to this you know 16 millimeter and the moon. You know, Damien really wanted the moon to play almost like a black and white silent horror movie, and so it's very monochromatic. It's very gray. He made sure that we made the sky completely black. And the black seems true black because it's IMAX. And then intercutting with the flashbacks, we pushed that color to be more like Kodachrome home movies. And so, so that was a lot of fun to play around with that too.
right. Was the runtime ever a concern for you guys? Because I bring it up because you cover a lot of ground. There's years and years worth
Yeah,
of story to tell, and I mean, you come in at about 220-ish, 218-ish.
right.
Were there things that you had to cut out that you wanted to keep in just to kind of like keep the flow of the movie going?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, it was something we're constantly aware of. I mean, we always knew that we'd have a big movie. We always knew we'd have a lengthy movie. It'd have to be a certain amount of length because we wanted it to feel epic. You know, we wanted it to cover this whole swath of Neil Armstrong's journey, from being an X-15 test pilot to then what happens after he gets home from landing on the moon. That's a big chunk of time we wanted to cover. And so we knew it couldn't be the length of Whiplash. We knew it couldn't be like a 90-minute movie. That just wouldn't do it justice. But we wrestled with it, and it meant that we had to lose certain moments. You know, I mean, Damien is a believer in the movie you know, being what it wants to be, but not at the expense of losing your audience. And so there were some things we did trim down. I mean, there's a moment, a beautiful moment in the trailer of the Apollo 8 launch, and it's a beautiful oneer. It's a single shot where we see Ryan Gosling's face, Neil Armstrong's face, through this picture window, and we see the launch of Apollo 8, the rocket, reflected in the glass. And he's in a room full of spectators, and the glass shakes and the camera moves in. It's a shot that's actually in some of the trailers for First Man. Well, that was something that, for a variety of reasons, we felt it might feel a little redundant, but also for time, we figured that you know, our time is better spent in other places. So there definitely were some things that we, you know, that went the way of the cutting room floor. I mean, there were some other sequences that changed quite a bit. Some of the family scenes, the scenes in the Armstrong home uh, with with Neil and with Janet and the kids, those things changed quite a bit because Damien shot rehearsal footage of the family. He shot 2 weeks of rehearsal footage before principal photography started, and he wanted all those actors to get together and get comfortable as a family, especially the kids, the child actors. Some of them hadn't been in front of a camera before. And so they were in full makeup and hair in fully dressed sets of the Armstrong homes. And Damien put them together just to play house. And he figured that would be the best way. But he also shot it. He filmed it. He had Linus Sandgren and a skeleton crew just follow them around like he was filming a documentary, and it was completely improvised and unscripted. And a lot of that material made its way into the film. And a lot of that meant that we cobbled together some of this almost documentary footage, and found that stuff felt more authentic and unique than what was scripted. And so we were in this place where we were replacing scripted family scenes with kind of the documentary versions of them. And that was fun to do, but also challenging because we had a lot of material, and a lot of his material was if he ran two cameras, he'd have a second camera just grabbing little documentary details. And again, great for an editor because you have an abundance of riches, but also a lot of material. On this film, he shot more than he shot on Whiplash and La La Land combined. I mean, he shot 1.7 million feet of film in several different film formats, 16 millimeter, 2 perf 35 millimeter, and then 3 and 4 perf 35 millimeter VistaVision, and then the IMAX photography. So it was a lot. It was a lot to handle.
Well, one of the things that was surprising watching the movie is that there's all these quiet moments. You know, I mean, you have all
Right.
the big visceral things that are in the trailer, but most of the movie is about this family dynamic as well. And you know, I don't want to give anything away, but
Yeah.
I was really surprised by that last shot of the movie,
Right.
kind of putting a bow on that. Can you just talk about not losing sight of the human drama at the center of the historical drama?
Sure. Yeah, that was really important to Damien. It was important to balance the space missions. I mean, Damien always described the movie, the core of the movie being the balance between the moon and the kitchen sink. And by that, he meant that we were going to have these space mission scenes, which were going to be vital to the film. They were going to be, his hope was they'd be immersive and visceral and scary. But then he knew that to really add value to that, you would have to juxtapose it with something interesting on the earthbound family side. And so that's why he shot these rehearsals. I think part of the reason he shot them. And that's why we spent a lot of time focusing on the family part of it. Because I think that's one of the big things that I think, you know, he wanted people to go away with. He wanted people to see the movie and realize just how heroic these astronauts were because of how dangerous these missions were. But also another takeaway was that you know, when these astronauts go on these dangerous missions, their families invariably go along for the ride, and that was something Damien really wanted to show. And so, you know, I think the other thing too is that a lot of people, you know, already know that he stepped on the moon. So what can we show the audience that they haven't seen before? That's where the family material came into play. We don't know what it was like inside the Armstrong home, except if we speak with the sons, Rick and Mark Armstrong, which Damien did. But that's the type of stuff that was really valuable. And along those lines, the stuff on the moon, the most important stuff to Damien on the moon was were some of the quiet moments with Neil on the moon, where Neil is alone and he's not talking on the comms, and he's standing at the crater. Those are private moments that are extremely intimate and personal. And our hope was that if we showed audiences what happened behind the curtain at home or when they were alone, then we'd truly be showing the audience something they hadn't seen before. And then we'd be doing our job. So that was a big thing. I mean, also when we went more in the direction of just the mission movie, the movie started feeling too conventional. It started feeling too familiar, too much like a genre movie. And so that's where we had to kind of bolster some of the family drama and stuff like that. And similarly, when it was more just the family material, when there was too much of that, then the plot kind of went off the rails. So it was definitely a challenge to find a balance, and an important one.
You've been a part of Chazelle's directorial career almost since the beginning. I mean, you did Whiplash, and then La La Land, and this. How has that relationship grown over the last three films?
Well, I think we've definitely gotten closer, and we continue to have a shorthand that grows and grows and grows. I mean, I was with him I didn't do his first film, Guy and Madeline on a Park Bench, but I saw it and loved it. But I did work on the Whiplash short film, and that's when we first met and we first worked together. And Damien and I, we love a lot of the same movies, and the way we I guess the way we like to tell our stories is very similar, or often the same, and we're very allied in that way. And on this movie, this was such an ambitious movie in terms of the footage and the formats and the style that he wanted to tell the story in, the cinema verite style, that we had to work even more closely together than we had in the past. So, we had a very ambitious schedule that meant that we had to work 6 or 7 day weeks, sometimes anywhere from 14 to 20-hour days. Damien loves the editing process, so he's there the whole time with me. We're working together. He's not a director that checks out and says, "I'll see you later," and then comes back the next day. He is there the whole time. And another big thing that we did to ensure we made our release date and also the film festivals is that we situated ourselves on the Universal lot in one building. We were editing in the Hitchcock building, and the Hitchcock building is also where our mixing stage was. And it's a building that has a couple different floors and a lot of different rooms. So we were able to do color correction upstairs. We were able to review visual effects in high res and 2K, also upstairs. Downstairs, we would do our final mix. And right next door, we had our sound team and the rest of our VFX department down the hall. So we pretty much were able to do everything in one building on the Universal lot. And I'm convinced that if we didn't have it set up that way, that we'd probably still be editing now. So it was that was actually smart planning on the part of our post supervisors, Jeff Harlacker and Jason Miller. They helped kind of mastermind this. They worked with post executive Sean Stratton and Greg McRitchie to kind of clear the deck and clear the way in this building for our whole big crew to work together. I mean, we did everything there pretty much except for scoring. So I think that was instrumental in helping us finish the movie.
Well, Tom Cross, it's always a pleasure talking with you. Congratulations on another terrific film. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Great talking to you.
Great talking to you too.
Take care.
Have a good one.